we're not the 14th and 15th century, okay, where if southern France had a failed harvest, people in southern France died because they couldn't get crops that were in southern Italy that were in abundance. You just couldn't move the crops. That's why the supply chain thing kind of scares me more than anything else. If we're unable or unwilling to move foodstuffs and energy across the world, then we can repeat the disaster of the 14th and 15th and 16th centuries. If not, then I think it's going to be inconvenient for some and more hardship for others.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us again for the next month's talk here. I'm with Bob Kudla, tradelikeagenius.com. Have you seen what has happened in the last 1 month since we had a few ideas of how 2022 might roll out and affect your lives with so many different things? The Arab Spring, remember that chapter in history? Well, we might very well be repeating another one of those. Wanted to talk to Bob about that today. Kazakhstan's on the tip of everybody's lips. 40% of uranium production globally, in addition to potash, and that is the hub of Asia. And if you didn't know how much aquifer cubic kilometers, I think there's about 100,000 cubic kilometers of water on the periphery nations, in addition to Kazakhstan. It is, outside of the Nubian Sandstone Aquifer, the largest amount of reserve water under the planet. And we come into the fertilizer shortages, which are going to be about 12% globally. The herbicides you might start to hear about now. And when words like anhydrous start to make the water cooler talk, well, you're right in the middle of a repeating chapter of history. We're going to go short-term chapter of history, Arab Spring. Well, we can go out into different multi-century cycles when governments collapse, people migrate, and famine sweeps the land. How will governments react, do you think, is probably the question. So, Bob, I appreciate you joining me again so we can try to get a little more insight into this whole Kazakhstan. I talked about Kyrgyzstan in the last series of videos last month about how important it was to get those aquifers on the border area with Kazakhstan up and running so they could get their greenhouses put out to produce food. But hey, I wonder if that's related.
Yeah, Dave, Happy New Year. So 2022, as we've described it over the last couple of months, is playing out, to a T. So we're at a point now where there's a dollar shortage around the world. It seems bizarre because everybody always thinks, oh my gosh, the dollar, is it's being ruined by all this deficit spending. But you have to understand the dollar is basically it's one of many in a basket. And so if you're producing more euros or more yen or more yuan, and you also borrow in dollars that you don't pay back, you create what's called a dollar shortage. And that's what we have right now. Believe it or not, there's a dollar shortage out there. And the Fed has been desperate to try to push more dollars in. While a lot of the deficit spending has been happening, they're trying to push more dollars out there. Economic activity has been stagnant. You wouldn't think so because of all the supply shortages, because you think demand is so high, but it's really supply issues. And now we find ourselves back into another Arab Spring. I call it the worldwide winter is coming because, people think, oh, inflation, higher prices, that means stock markets are going to go up. Well, actually, if you read your history books, the stock markets hate inflation. In the beginning, they like it. At the end, it's like eating too many potato chips. And if you're a country like Turkey, which this time is where it started, where you don't have enough energy to feed your people or enough farmland, or you don't have enough energy to heat and run transportation, that you have to go ahead and import those things, then you become a failed state. And Turkey is a failed state right now. So it's the wrong place in the world for a country in that situation to be, failing. And then all we have to do is drift a little bit north and a little bit east, and we got our second domino falling, as Kazakhstan. Now, Kazakhstan's falling for essentially the same reasons, but not they don't have the same situation. They're falling because they have an oligarchy-run country, and they basically squeeze their people to where they can't afford anything anymore. And so the government doesn't generate enough revenue, through taxation, because it's all being siphoned off by by basically the Kazakh mob, which I'm sure is being enabled by the Russian and the Chinese mobs. And they have a situation now where that country is starting to implode. Normally, should we care? Well, Kazakhstan is absolutely critical to the world economy. They're 40% of the uranium production. You mentioned potash, they're an important fertilizer producer, but they're also a huge oil and gas producer. And their railroad tracks run across their country from China into Europe. And they just dropped this country into the lap of Mother Russia. And so now you have the Russians, if we just continue on this game of thrones, if you will, we got Mother Russia now, that was a marginal producer of wheat in the world. And they're agitating against the Ukraine, which would make them even more powerful in that regard. Oil, natural gas, and strategic metals. Now you add uranium and fertilizer and more strategic minerals with Kazakhstan, and oh, by the way, impose a toll on China and Europe for the crosswise traffic, you have a recipe for a flashpoint, in addition to all the other supply and demand, implications that Russia controlling Kazakhstan will do. So that is all eyes on Kazakhstan. I personally am interested in it because I have a very large position in uranium and CCJ. It's really weird. All the places where they have strategic metals, the other place in the world that has it is in Canada. So if there's potash problems, there's Canadian Potash Company, MOS. So during today, I'm going to give people 5 or 6 stocks you got to own. Okay, whether you buy my service or not, you got to own these for your own personal well-being. Mosaic is one of them. CCJ is another one. 2 large productions of minerals in our hemisphere. Think Western Hemisphere if you want to own anything, and make sure it's not going to get stolen from you. Okay, and then you turn around and now the shipping is still not resolved. So you have shipping companies as well. And I'll take a breath, and you and I could talk some more. But those 2 things are critical into food production and energy production, and basically Europe in the balance. And you're going to start seeing all those issues start to amplify here in 2022.
Let me throw another side of that triangle of nastiness, if you will. On the 15th of January here, unless truckers can provide proof of vaccination, they're not going to be able to cross the Canadian-US border. Now they're looking at around 15% of all truckers to say no, and that number might increase a little bit higher. But they're looking at the amount of goods, and you have to do some math with that. 70% of the $700 billion that the US does in cross-border trade, trucking on land trade, runs through 18-wheel traffic to get it in and out. So how's that going to affect the states that rely so heavily on Canada for the imports? And then if you look at Kazakhstan, their wheat, 10 million tons of wheat. Now we're not in the planting season right now, but the world's going to be struggling with the fertilizer and the herbicide shortages, and 10 million tons to add into something that's depleting globally would be nice. But imagine if you, like you say, they're right in that crossroads of the new Silk Road that China had set up and counted on it being its own, and nobody would ever, interfere with that because they're China. But here we are. If you pull that one piece out, their entire new Silk Road doesn't work any longer. And all these flashpoints are here, and it's just going to be a meltdown in supply chains. And then, Canada, Kazakhstan, and there's other points with the Ukraine. But it seems like there's a lot of things happening at the same time on this planet that are all pointing to get ready.
Oh, that's my cue. So so the Canadian issue is very, very, very interesting to me, because truckers are kind of a weird lot, right? They're very fiercely independent, even the ones that are probably vaccinated. And you have to understand too, those truckers don't have to go to Canada. We have a trucker shortage in the United States. those truckers are happy to carry loads somewhere else. But that's why we have a shipping crisis in the country, because the California government won't let trucks over a certain age on the roads. Okay, and so that's why we can't pull the containers off the ships on the trucks and out of the state because of that. Yeah, Canada. Look, Canada's on my list of failed states. I think they're in deep weeds. So I wouldn't be surprised over the next 5 to 10 years that the Western Canadian provinces, sans British Columbia, sues for inclusion into as like Puerto Rico into the United States, because those provinces are allowed constitutionally to leave Canada. They're basically an amalgamation like the United States, but they can walk away. Remember when Quebec wanted to walk away, and everybody said go because Quebec just sucks tax revenue from everywhere else in the provinces, and they wouldn't survive without, unless they're trying to connect themselves back to France, and which I don't think the Quebecos really wanted that. They just wanted to, assert some sort of game internally. But Canada could just easily bust apart. And if China or Russia then decides they want to engage, the United States will have no choice but to get involved and not allow that to happen. So it's going to be interesting to watch. But let's talk shipping here, because there's another way to make money. So here's another stock you guys want to put on your list. ZIM. Okay, it pays massive dividends. We have a shipping shortage the next year. There's a few other shipping stocks that we're trading in and out of right now, all pay good dividends. So put that one on your list too. There's 3 right there that you're going to be fine with. And the 4th one is political. Let's tie this whole thing up into a bow now. Is that because we're hyper politicized right now? We're going into an election in the United States, and guess who owns a social media empire that is being given birth in February? President Trump. Okay, the vehicle that they're using is DWAC, DWAC. We're in it. We've been in it, and today, and last week, and this week, and again today, is making these $10, $15 moves higher. And we're making tons of money trading this thing. This thing was $180 when it first came out, dropped all the way back down into the upper 30s, and now we're back up to $63 again. And they're launching in February, and I suspect that the interest level of this stock is going to go through the roof. And I think we'll see this thing back in triple digits in no time at all. I mean, it has no problem breathing and moving up $12, $15, $20. So there's another opportunity for people here. Throw a little bit in your IRA. You can trade it on your regular accounts. These moving parts, and interesting for us, at trading, is that I love moving parts because you make money on moving parts. When the stock market's kind of benign and grinding, you can make money, but not nearly as profitable as when the markets are seizing up like they are right now and not knowing what to do. So that's the 4th one, and I'll have one more for you before we end the show today.
Yeah, let me tie a bow on top of the bow there. When is it that the realization for the general public to all these things that are happening really comes home? Like you always talk Mama Bear. When is Mama Bear going to understand that with all the political turmoil, the shortages in here, it's really going to affect what goes on the dinner table? How are they going to mitigate that? And to cut out the discourse of these problems that we're all facing, and we all need to find solutions. Of course, everybody's going to gravitate to a platform where people will be allowed more free speech and be able to express the ideas and then have a real conversation instead of just say, hey, I have a little bit different idea. Listen to it. If you think it's valid, we'll talk about it more. If you don't think it's valid, call me a kook and we're done. Great. I'll take that. But as soon as you put out a different idea or opinion against the narrative, then suddenly they just try to remove you. So these gargantuan sets of problems that are dovetailing, and they are wrapping into a package that we haven't seen in how many centuries do you think, since this amount of, intertwining, I guess, triggering downfalls and the next cascade to the next cascade. I'm going to say, at least 100, 200 to 400 years since we're seeing so much turmoil happening at the same time. when do you think the general populace will wake up? Because that's going to trigger a lot of other what you're talking about, movements in the markets, purchase pattern changes, spending habits. Money's going to move into different sectors. And when people behave differently and think differently, then the whole entire landscape of commercial, and it could be out at supermarkets or any types of services. Some are just going to die off and tumbleweed out into the desert there, but others are going to be well needed. So if you can kind of take a look at where these problems are when the awakening comes for the general populace and how they're going to move like a herd, because they're like herd animals. They're going to move. And I'm sorry if I'm calling you not herd animal, but people move in herds and mentality. Look at the news, people move. And when they get into a certain mentality, they're going to move. And they're not only going to move markets, they're going to shift reality itself. And the panic might start. And then, how's that going to be dealt with? So these moving parts, continue into the future with it. What's going to be that trigger for the awakening of the average everyday person understanding it? And then how will they actuate on that information?
Yeah, it already started. You have to look no further than look at population migrations in the United States over the last 18 months. So we're moving from blue to red. We're moving from big city to small. So people are starting to vote with their pocketbook. California lost 1% of its population, unheard of. And I think that the next election is going to basically give voice to all these things in a landslide from blue to red across the spectrum. Well, that's broken now too. So I think this is 2022 is the year of broken bonds, which needs to happen. When things rise, they kind of rise like in a gentle slope, but when things fall, they break. They call it the escalator up, the elevator down. And it has to be by human nature, because people don't like to change. They don't like to take pain unless pain is imposed upon them. And so I think you're going to continually see this, and which is fascinating. Not all of this is bad, Dave. You and I talked about this before with climate change. We're not the 14th and 15th century, okay, where if southern France had a failed harvest, people in southern France died because they couldn't get crops that were in southern Italy that were in abundance. You just couldn't move the crops. That's why the supply chain thing kind of scares me more than anything else. If we're unable or unwilling to move foodstuffs and energy across the world, then we can repeat the disaster of the 14th and 15th and 16th centuries. If not, then I think it's going to be inconvenient for some and more hardship for others. And so, so I mean, it's coming. And here's the fifth stock for you guys. BGS, okay, is a food supply company. If you want to get Andy, ANDE, or if you want to get Kroger, those are good as well. Because look, we're embedded in the inflation side now. So no matter what they do, we've crossed the Rubicon where the pricing pressure is now pushing through the snake. And even if you raise interest rates and doubled interest rates, it still doesn't stop things from happening, because some of these things are irrespective of constraint. Like uranium, for example, they have to buy uranium. People have to eat. And if you have supply problems, that doesn't lessen demand. It just means something else doesn't get bought, because you're going to pour more of your money into. And the other thing too is, because we're all older now, a lot of us aren't carrying the debt loads we carried when we were in our 30s and 40s. And like my situation, I can literally sell my home. I can move from where I live and move to where you live and not have a mortgage and maintain my lifestyle. So I just freed up a couple more $1,000 a month to either not earn it, right, and do what's happening in the economy now. 4% of the people my age left the workforce. That's why we're having these problems. And the kids, that should be in the lower rung jobs, they're trading cryptos, okay, or they just got flushed with the government. So they're not in the workforce unless they get pushed into the workforce. They don't see a benefit of working because they know they can't get ahead. So those things are persistent. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they get and move out of these positions with higher interest rates. It's going to fail.